Many thousands of years ago, glacial action carved a gap a mile wide through the limestone ridge which runs north to south across Lincolnshire. This gap in the ridge was now occupied by the River Witham, met with the River Till flowing from the west to create a small lake and known today as the Brayford Pool. Archaeological excavations undertaken in 1972 to the east side of the Brayford revealed first-century traces of timber houses and contemporary pottery. How extensive this settlement was we may never know. Its remains lie deeply buried beneath the heart of the shopping centre. The people who were living here 2,000 years ago were Celtic and belonged to a tribe called the Corritani. Their principal and largest centres of settlement appear to have been Sleaford and Leicester. They used a coinage, and their pottery seems to have links with the style of the Kentish tribes in the south of England. In the early 40s AD, the tranquility of these lakeside dwellers' lives would have been disturbed by the news that the Emperor of the Roman Empire, Claudius, was planning to invade Britain. It was in 43 AD when 4 legions under the command of Aulus Plautius, numbering over 50,000 men, came ashore in Kent, and meeting with no opposition, secured a landing on the mainland. Once the Romans had established themselves, they moved further into the country, and whenever they encountered various tribes, they would employ their well-practiced principle of divide and rule. After some initial resistance from a few of the Celtic tribes, the Roman invasion took on a 3-pronged advance across the country. 2 legions were dispatched to move west, another was to advance into the Midlands, and the 9th Hispania was directed to advance north along the east side of England. It was in 48 AD, 5 years after the invasion, that the Romans arrived here in Lincoln and called the place Lindum. The first syllable of this word, lin, is derived from the Celtic word for pool or lake. Realising the strategic importance of occupying the gap as essential on the route of conquest northwards, with the river crossing to defend, perhaps to block hostile movement from east to west, and the river being useful for supply purposes, they quickly set to work and constructed 2 fortresses. On top of the hill, a fortress was constructed. The area around it would have been cleared of trees to supply the enormous amount of timber needed not only for the fort but also for the barracks to house all the soldiers. Across the bridge, which was built over the River Witham, south, around Monson Street, another fortress was constructed. Several Roman tombstones were found here, one of them being the standard-bearer of the 9th Hispania. Over the following years, the 9th Legion manned what was essentially a frontier fortress against the more hostile tribes to Roman rule, who were the Brigantes that lived throughout Derbyshire and Yorkshire. During this period, Lindum was the most northerly of the main fortresses that marked out the boundaries of the Roman province, which stretched in a line from the River Trent southwest to the River Severn. There was no real effort by the Romans to advance any further at this period, just hold ground and try to deal with any insurgents while trying to negotiate with their rebellious and independent neighbours. In 59 AD, Suetonius, a general of merit and very popular with the Roman army, arrived in Britain with the intention of pushing the Roman advance further north. His first objective was to destroy the stronghold of the Ordovices on the island of Anglesey, which was also the centre of the Druid religion, and was a refuge for all rebels and deserters. It was in the spring of 60 AD that Suetonius began the invasion of North Wales and took with him 2 legions, the 14th and the 20th, leaving the 2nd Augusta at Gloucester to keep the ever-hostile Silures in check, which left the 9th Hispania at Lindum the only solid force in eastern England. While Suetonius was engaged in massacring the Druids in Anglesey, news arrived that the whole of eastern Britain had risen in revolt. The rebellion was caused by the outrageous behaviour of some Roman officials who dispossessed and enslaved the relatives of a widowed queen of the Icenian tribe, Boadicea. She was assaulted for offering opposition, and her 2 young daughters were violated. The whole tribe of the Iceni sprang to arms to avenge these outrages, and were at once joined by others who also had grievances. All the chiefs of eastern Britain listened to the appeal of Boadicea, and region after region rose and placed its levies at the disposal of the injured queen. 120,000 tribesmen were on the march south, burning and plundering the Roman settlements as they made their way south to Camalodunum, a colony of retired soldiers and British settlers. With no fortifications of any kind, the town was devastated by the onslaught. No mercy was shown, and the whole population slain, and the town was burnt to the ground. News of the rebellion had reached Lindum, where the 9th was quartered. Taking some 2,000 men, mainly infantry, but with some cavalry, a young legate of the 9th of Petilius Cerilius hurried southward along Ermine Street to intercept Boadicea's forces. But he could have no idea about the scale of the rebellion. Against 120,000 Celtic tribesmen, what could 2,000 legionnaires do?
Just south of Stamford in South Lincolnshire.
Petilius's tiny force was surrounded and cut to pieces. Petilius and some cavalry managed to escape and return back to Lindum. The Romans feared that they were going to lose the whole island. The rebellion was eventually suppressed after Suetonius had rushed all the way back from North Wales with his 2 legions, during which time Boadicea and her massed ranks had ransacked St Albans and London. Suetonius finally confronted the great horde of Celtic warriors and won a startling victory. Boadicea poisoned herself soon after the battle when she realised all was lost. Suetonius, who was retained in command for a year longer, succeeded in restoring order within the old boundaries of the province and reinforced the devastated 9th Legion at Lindum from the continent with 2,000 legionary recruits, 8 auxiliary cohorts and 1,000 horse. After Boadicea's rebellion, there followed a 10-year period of peace, during which time an intensive building programme was undertaken by the Romans to repair and build new towns. This was when the great highways were constructed throughout the province. Lindum was connected via Ermine Street heading south to London, and the Fossway running southwest via Leicester, Cirencester and Bath to Exeter. In 70 AD, a war of aggression began that lasted for 15 years. It was began by a domestic dispute among the brigands, who lived throughout Yorkshire and Derbyshire. It was in the same year that the Emperor Vespasian, who had himself as a general commanded the 2nd Augusta on the campaigns in the West Country some 30 years before, appointed as governor to Britain the same Petilius Cerilius, who 10 years earlier had tried to suppress the Boadicea rebellion. Petilius Cerilius chose his old legion as a spearhead of attack on the brigands. Pushing forward with the 9th Hispania, he marched out of Lindum northwards, where eventually the legion built a fortress at Eberagum around 71 AD, and known today as York, which was right in the heartland of the brigands. Though Lindum was no longer a frontier fortress, it still had its uses as a base for supplying the northern advance. The fortresses here were then garrisoned with the arrival of another legion called the 2nd Adutrix, which had been sent over from the continent. Over the next 20 years, as the theatre of war moved further north, thus Lindum was less under threat, and the status of the place was changed from a fortress to that of a colony. Over the next few decades, Lindum Colonia witnessed a major programme of public works. The fortifications on top of the hill was provided with a stone wall at its front and embellished by a series of towers at intervals of approximately 50 metres and a new outer ditch. The wood barrack blocks inside the fortification were slowly demolished to make way for stone-built houses and apartment blocks centred around the forum. So, by the beginning of the 2nd century, Lindum Colonia was an expanding Roman colony. No doubt there were veterans from other legions other than the 9th, as well as native settlers here. The place would have been a hive of activity, as it became the principal town in the region.